Hello YouTube, Dave here again. As I posted earlier on my community tab, I guess that's what it's called, I am dealing with an arm injury. I don't know what happened. I just woke up one morning and I can barely lift or move my right arm. So it's going to kind of cut down on the amount of videos that I can do because it's hard for me to reach around the tripod to do things like flip through books and stuff like that. So I still want to get something out before I do my character creation video, which I'll be recording on Thursday and uploading on Friday. So I figured another top 10 list would be pretty easy to do because I can just, show the covers of the books and I don't have to flip through them. And I won't be flipping through them in this video, but I might be doing individual reviews of the books that you see here in a future video. So today we are taking a look at my top 10 favorite 3.5 D&D books. Now, this is just going to be the sort of like the core rules of 3.5. It's not going to include the campaign settings of Forgotten Realms or Eberron. I will be doing those as their own separate videos, which I'll probably be doing after my 4th edition top 10 video, which will be the next one in this series if I don't decide to sprinkle in like Pathfinder or Starfinder or something like that into the mix in the meantime. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it. So this is my personal top 10 list. There's actually quite a few books that I wanted to have in this video as well, but I decided to stick with the ones that I always think about when I think about my favorite 3rd edition or 3.5 books in this case. So we're going to start with Complete Arcane. Now, this is a book that I really enjoyed because it has one of my favorite non-player's handbook, like, core classes. That was sort of the terminology that was used for them back in the 3rd edition era. So a core class was just one that went all the way from 1st to 20th level, as opposed to a prestige class, which was usually 5 to 10 levels of progression, and they were highly specialized. But this book had the War Mage in there, which I just absolutely loved that version of the Arcane Spellcaster. It was also one that was very popular with my gaming group, as I had 2 different players in 2 different campaigns independently choose that version of the Spellcaster. So the War Mage, I might try to flip to it just really quickly here if I can. But what was great about the War Mage is that they were essentially designed for combat. Oh, okay. So these were characters that were spontaneous spellcasters, similar to what we had with the Sorcerer. However, they were focused largely on just evocation spells and evocation magic. They also had an ability that allowed them to add their intelligence modifier to the damage that they deal with their spells. So, like, if they did a fireball, it would be like 5d6 plus their intelligence modifier. Or if they had a spell that could target multiple enemies, like Magic Missile, for example, they had to choose which of the missiles that their intelligence modifier would go on to. But it was just really kind of cool to see something where they got to add their ability modifier to their spells. And when I was running the adventure paths for 3rd edition D&D, Shackled City and Age of Worms, because combat was such a big part of those adventure paths, like, this class was really great for that. There was also a substitution ability, I believe in another book that we're going to be taking a look at here a little bit later in the list, which allowed them to choose spells outside of evocation, or outside of like evocation and like abjuration or whatever the limited schools of magic that they had available to them, that they could also add to their repertoire. And this particular version of a spellcaster was able to wear armor. And as they progressed, they went from being able to wear light armor to being able to wear medium armor. They still had a crappy attack bonus, which, they're just always going to have. But this was just a really cool class, and some of my favorite characters that I had as players in my 3.5 games, they were, if they were Arcane casters, they were made using the Complete Arcane. So really, really cool book. Coming in at number 9, we have the Monster Manual 4. Now, I have the first 4 Monster Manuals and the Fiend Folio. Unfortunately, I never did get the Monster Manual 5. I really hope that DM's Guild adds that as a print-on-demand item at some point in the future, because trying to get it on the secondary market is ridiculous. Like, I've seen Monster Manual 5s going for like multiple hundreds of dollars, and I refuse to pay anywhere close to that. So I hope it comes to print on demand at some point. But this book was awesome. So the Monster Manual 2 was probably one of my least favorite of the Monster Manual books. Monster Manual 3 was fine, but the problem with like a lot of the other monster books that 3rd edition was releasing is that it was just like a single set of stats for a creature, and it was just like the regular Monster Manual. It was just filled with things that you weren't going to use a whole lot of. What was great about the Monster Manual 4 is that it actually took some of like the humanoid enemies from the original Monster Manual and gave you a wider range of pre-made stats for like a shaman, or an elite warrior, or like their chieftain, right? So it would have like different sets of stats for like orcs and hobgoblins and kobolds and stuff like that, which is really great. What was also cool in this book, and I know I didn't want to flip through a lot of these, but okay, perfect, is that they also include maps that are just thrown in there for you to use either as layers for the monster that is either in front of or after this particular map appears in the book, or they're just maps that you can use in your campaign. So you just get a lot of just really cool maps that you can use for your campaigns. And again, like with the gnolls here, you've got like the Slave Taker, you've got the Fiendish Cleric of Ynogu, which is actually based off of one of the chainmail miniatures that they had out at the time, or that came out previously. You got like the Half-Fiend Warlock. So you've got like just some different variations that you can use for your campaigns. And again, this is like the Gnoll entry is several pages as opposed to just like one set of monster stats. So this was, again, really awesome to see. And just something that I think that the Monster Manual 4 did really, really well. I didn't get the Monster Manual 5, like I said, it was very similar to this one. I wish I had. It's just at the time I was working like for months on end. I was working regular like 14-hour days, 5 days a week, sometimes 12 days in a row if I had to pick up somebody's shifts for the weekend. So I was just like burnt out and just mentally just not with the gaming at that point in time. But this book was awesome, and I wish that other monster manuals would have followed suit beyond just like these ones for 3rd edition, like, in 5th edition. I think there are some of the expanded monster books do a little bit of that in 5e, but man, I love this format that they had, and it's one of my favorite monster books for sure. Speaking of monsters, 3rd edition, and you'll see a few of these books on this list, but they're some of my favorite books, and these are like monster-specific books, like ecology books, I guess, could be the terminology that you could use for them. And this one is the Fiendish Codex 2, Tyrants of the Nine Hells. So there was a Fiendish Codex 1, which was Hordes of the Abyss, I think it was called. And that was a good book. That was an okay book. But this book, in my opinion, was just so much better. And the one reason I think this book is so much better is that it has like a prelude chapter, which is just nothing but flavor text. And it depicts Asmodeus becoming the Lord of Hell, and the deal that he struck through like legal means with the Celestials to basically like damn people's souls to the nine hells. It was just a really chilling read, and I don't say that lightly because I don't typically really get like those kinds of vibes off of like literature or fiction or anything like that. But reading through that, when like you get to the scene where he just gives like the evil smile and agrees to like these terms that he manipulated these Celestials into enforcing upon him, which is actually what he wanted. It was just such a great read that alone has always stuck in my mind. And, this book is like 13 years old or more at this point. I can't remember when this one came out. Actually, it's probably older than that. So this was 2006. So yeah, it's like 17 years old now. Holy crap. But yeah, that moment has always stuck with me. So for that alone, it had to be on this list. So that was what, 10, 9, 8. So coming in at number 7, we have Races of the Wild. So yeah, this book again, one of my favorite 3rd edition 3.5 books. What was great about this book though is that it's where you sort of started to shift away from just having just a bunch of like rule stuff to throw into your games, and started to really try to explain things and introduce a lot more flavor text into the third edition books, which was something that was sorely missing prior to this. Now, Race of the Wild wasn't the first book to do that. I think Race of Destiny is the first one I remember that just had a lot of like flavor text for things like prestige classes and trying to justify how they would fit into your campaign world, having them more organizational based than what we had before, which is basically just, we're going to throw a whole bunch of crap at the wall and see what sticks kind of approach that they had for prestige classes before. But Race of Destiny was a great book, but Race of the Wild I prefer more because elves are my favorite fantasy RPG race. And just the flavor text was so great in this book. It starts with a couple page long, like a day in the life of, and it just sort of follows an elven individual or a few different elves around as they do like their daily routines. It goes into a lot of flavor text into like their society, their customs, how they view like adventuring and stuff like that. It was just really, really fun to read. And it also had some great substitution levels for like the Elven Ranger or some other things in there as well. You also had halflings, I believe, included in this book, and you had the Raptorans, which were an avian race that basically had they would use their talons like a second set of hands, and they actually had like the like a foot bow that they would be able to use with like so they could do archery. While they were using their arms for flight, they could use their feet to draw and fire the bow, which is really cool. So I really like this book quite a bit. But just the fact that this is where you started to see a lot more flavor coming into the D&D game, which was long overdue in my opinion when it came to 3rd edition. So that is why this is number 7 on my list. Coming in at number 6, we have the Expanded Psionics Handbook. I love this book. This is what got me interested in psionics in the first place. A friend of mine had the 3.0 Psionics Handbook, and I remember borrowing that and being like, man, this sucks. Psionics in 3rd edition was just not particularly good at all. But the 3rd edition version fixed a lot of the issues that you had. In the 3.0 book, you used different ability scores for your abilities DCs versus the bonus psion points or psychic points that you would have to use your psionic abilities. So you had to have multiple different decent ability scores to have a good saving throw like DC for your effects, as well as to have extra power points for you to use to manifest your powers. In this book, they just have their one ability score that they'll end up using. So instead of it being like multiple for different things, you just use the same attribute for your bonus points as well as your DCs and things along those lines, which was great. They also fixed psychic powers so that they actually are able to be improved upon by just pumping extra points into them, as opposed to having to essentially just get a higher level version that just costs more like you did in the 3.0 book. And what's really cool about the 3.5 psionics from this book is it's kind of a precursor to 5th edition spellcasting, believe it or not. It's not like a direct like one-for-one, but there are things that I can see in the way that psionics are handled in this book that definitely reminds me of the way that spellcasting is done in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. So, for example, your spell slots can effectively just be like spell points that you use. And if you wanted to use a higher level version of, like, say, Magic Missile, you just spend an extra spell level or an extra point, power point, or whatever you want to call it, to make your Magic Missile better. And that's what this book did. You had your low level abilities or your abilities that would be able to scale by just putting extra power points into. And certain abilities might require you to spend a certain number of extra points in order to gain a better ability from it. But it was still just a really well thought out and much more playable version of psionics for the 3rd edition D&D system. And like it says that it's expanded, like it's supposed to be compatible with the 3.0, but it just replaces everything. And again, the cover is just amazing. Just like the brain and the background. I love this book. one of my favorite optional system books that was released for 3.5 back in the day. All right, top 5 time. So coming in at number 5, we have the Player's Handbook 2. One of the issues that 3rd edition definitely suffered from was supplement bloat, where you just had like a slew of books releasing, multiple books every single month was coming out with new like spells or magic items or prestige classes or things that could just really overwhelm a game. And I remember when I was running 3rd edition back in the day, I had my books in my bedroom, but I was running games out in the living room. So I started to have a larger and larger stack of books at my disposal because a player might take like a single feat out of a book, and if they didn't remember what the feat did, we'd have to go look it up. It was just kind of a hassle. So when I started running my current 3rd edition or 3.5 game, I limited it to just the core rule books only, the Player's Handbook, DMG, and Monster Manual. However, now that my group is becoming a little bit more familiar with the way that 3.5 works, and they're more comfortable with the rule system, there is one book that I was willing to add to the list of allowed books for this 3.5 campaign, and that is the Player's Handbook 2. This is just a fantastic book. It adds new classes that you choose from, but it also has some alternate class features or substitution class features that you can take for the existing classes that were in the original Player's Handbook. So you might have a druid who forgoes the shapeshifting ability, which was painfully frustrating to figure out in 3rd edition because the polymorph rules changed with like every 3rd book that came out. So you could just forego that altogether and then take on an aspect of the wild which works more similarly to a barbarian's rage. You just enter this form for a certain number of rounds, and it increases like a couple of stats and gives you like different forms of attack. This book was just fantastic, and when considering like 3.5 nowadays, I would consider this to be one of the few books that I would really recommend picking up. Not necessarily right away. I think you should start with the regular just Player's Handbook to get comfortable with the system, but once you get used to 3.5, once you get sort of more comfortable with it, then this is a book that I definitely recommend adding to the repertoire for like your players, or just to make things a little bit, spice things up a little bit. Like if you even wanted to introduce an NPC, like a ranger NPC that takes the substitution feature that eliminates their pretty subpar spellcasting to give them other features instead would be kind of cool. So I just think this is a fantastic book, and the fact that it is the only other like non-core rulebook, with one other exception, I guess, that I would be allowing in my 3.5 games says a lot about how much I like this book. So yeah, Player's Handbook 2, pretty awesome. So Player's Handbook 2 is a book that I am allowing players to use. It's the only other like major book that I'm allowing. However, technically, I would also allow the next book, which is the Spell Compendium. In fact, one of the things that I kind of want to do with this book, although right now my 3.5 campaign doesn't have a wizard, there's like a druid monk multi-class character and a cleric, and then the other characters are like a ranger and a like a fighter and a rogue. So I don't have a lot of spellcasting characters, but when I do, like if I do a random treasure, or if one of the treasures that I come across is a scroll, what I might actually do just to make them feel a little bit more exotic, especially where they're currently on the Isle of Dread, so they might come across some more unique stuff there, is I would probably have a scroll that would have a spell from the Spell Compendium as opposed to just like a regular Player's Handbook spell. So this just has some really fantastic spells in here. It was a collection of spells from a whole bunch of other books, essentially, and putting them all into one place. It does not duplicate any of the spells from the Player's Handbook, so it's just a great secondary resource for you to use in order to have some more unique spells available to your players. So like I said, my plan is to have a few spell scrolls when they come up as treasure that will feature some spells from this book, and if the players like them, then this would be another book that I would open up to them. But that would probably be it in terms of which books I make available. But yeah, the Spell Compendium, absolutely fantastic book. All right, now my top 3 favorite books for 3rd edition or 3.5 are probably not going to be a surprise to anyone who's followed this channel for a while. but we're going to go through them anyway. The first up is the Lords of Madness book. So this is another one of the monster ecology books that we had with like the Tyrants of the Nine Hells. And spoiler alert, this is not going to be the last of the ecology books that's going to appear in this list. And yes, I know we're in the top 3 already, but man, I love this book. Aberrations are some of my favorite creatures of all time, like the Mind Flayer, and the Beholder is flat out my favorite fantasy monster ever. So this book was absolutely fantastic, and it comes off the heels of a fairly underwhelming Libris Mortis book, which I've warmed up to a little bit since like it first came out. But if I were to like to rank the monster ecology books by how good I think that they are personally, Libris Mortis would still be at the bottom or near the bottom of that list. But Lords of Madness was just really, really fantastic. Had some great write-ups for some of the different creatures there, going into the reproduction cycles of things like Beholders and Mind Flayers. Is just really, really cool. Awesome book. Definitely deserves to be in my top 3 favorite 3.5 books. Coming in at number 2, we have the other monster ecology books that I absolutely adore, and that is the Draconomicon. So this book was awesome for a few different reasons. Number 1, just having filled out stat blocks for all the different major like monster manual dragons for each of the age categories saves a ton of time and prep work. Creating dragon stats wasn't difficult in 3rd edition or 3.5, but it was a little bit on the time-consuming side, because unlike most of the other monsters in the monster manual, you couldn't just open up the book and pull the stats right out of it. You had to sort of combine them and make a few decisions like skills and feats and things along those lines. So this book just did that for you, which was awesome. But it also introduced some other great elements. Number 1, the flavor text with like the dragon's anatomy was awesome to read. It was fun to sort of go through and see all that. The artwork in the book with like the different stages of the dragons was really cool. Like to see some of the hatchlings and just how adorable they drew some of them was really, really great. But you also had like meta breath feats, which a dragon could apply at the cost of adding extra rounds to the recharge time for their breath weapon to manipulate it, to like maximize it, or to split it into like turn a cone into a line or a line into a cone sort of thing. But they also had breath related spells and magic. And one of my favorite dragon encounters involved a red dragon that used the breath weapon energy substitution spell to never breathe fire when he would use his breath weapon. He would use basically, because it's a dragon, they're highly intelligent, and they know that if adventurers come to their lair to confront them, that they're going to be prepared to deal with fire when it's a fire-breathing dragon. So this dragon used nothing but the substitution spell to cast, make all of his breath weapons deal cold damage, because that's the last thing that they would probably be protected against when fighting a red dragon. And I remember my players were absolutely pissed at me for doing that, and I had this like lengthy description of how the dragon starts like moving its hands around and making this incantation that creates this like orb of white energy that it then inhales. And then after inhaling that white energy, it breathes out this cone of cold. I really milked that one for all it was worth, and I think my players kind of resented me for it. But it was still just a really, really fun time. And again, an example of the fact that like dragons are meant to be intelligent. Like they should use tactics that would catch their opponents off guard. And if one of those things is not using the breath weapon that they know that at least half intelligent adventurers would be prepared for, it was just a great time. So yeah, this book, I've used it a ton in my 3rd edition games, and yeah, it's one of my all-time favorites for that reason. All right, now coming in at number 1, we have the Magic of Incarnate. This is one of those like alternate system books, like the Psionics Handbook, like the Weapons of Legacy and stuff like that. But this book was just, I don't know what it was, but I just had an absolute blast making a 20th level villainous NPC, using like being an incarnate and using like the soul melds and combining that with magic items to just make this really just brutally difficult, like 20th level villain encounter. And my longest running 3.5 campaign beyond the pre-written adventure pass, I never got to use them because the campaign was just a few sessions shy of finishing up. But again, work schedules and other things just kind of got in the way. But the main villain was going to be this like epic level character that was near god level, but was amongst other things a 20th level incarnate who used the souls of his victims to form his soul melds. So I just had a lot of fun making that. I loved the system from the moment that I first got the book. Took it with me on a night shift and got to spend a couple hours reading through it and making some characters with it. I just think it was just a really cool idea of using like this latent soul energy that just exists in the cosmos and being able to shape it and wield it and turn it into sort of an alternate system of magic items. So it was it's just a really cool system. I don't know what it is, but it's just one of my all-time favorite books. It was unique. It was creative. I wish that we would revisit this in modern D&D. Like the fact that they've never done anything really to follow this book up is kind of sad in my opinion, because it was just such an interesting concept that I would love to see it come back in modern D&D. But we'll see what happens. But for now, it does take the top place as my favorite 3.5 book that I own. Not including Eberron books or not including like Forgotten Realms books, because those will be their own separate list. But yeah, those were my top 10 3.5 books. So what do you guys think? What are some of your favorite? I think that was 10, right? So let me just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, okay, perfect. So I wanted to make sure because I did take stuff for my arm and it might make me a little loopy. So, but yeah, those are my top 10 favorite 3.5 books. What were some of your favorite books from the 3.5 era? Were you surprised by any of the books on this list? Are there some that you would have put on here that I didn't mention? Again, stick to the non-campaign setting books because I'm going to do those as a separate video. But yeah, let me know what some of your favorite 3.5 books are and how much you got to use them, or if you got to use any of the ones on this list in your campaigns. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Until then, take care.